The Citizen Mike Show. News. Commentary. Interviews. Citizen Mike Show starts now.
Welcome to the Citizen Mike Show. Thanks for tuning in. We do appreciate it. My name is Mike Brodinsky. That's Ralph Tomaselli, the editor and boss of the Record Journal, the newspaper you read.
I don't feel like the boss sometimes, Mike.
Special guest in the studio, Republican Town Councilor Joe Marone. Joe, thanks for coming back on the show.
It's good to be here.
We got a lot of content to pack in, so let's get right to it. Our regular viewers know we've been following the story about the arbitration matter between CMEC and the Wallingford Electric Division. The moment of truth is coming up in June when, if the case is not settled, there's going to be a final hearing. And if the case is not settled after the final hearing, the arbitrator will be forced to write an opinion. So we may see some resolution of this at any minute or over the summer. But some recent developments that I wanted to report on and then get Joe's reaction. There was an agenda item in front of the PUC on Tuesday night. I went to that meeting at 6:30, and I sat for about 35 minutes while the Public Utilities Commission went through its regular agenda, waiting for these two items to come up on the agenda. And according to those items on the written agenda, the PUC wanted to add more money for legal expense. That's legal fees, arbitrators' fees, expert witness fee, whatever it may be. They wanted to add more money for the fiscal year ending 2017 and for the following fiscal year. After about that 30 minutes or so, there's public question and answer. A member of the public says, well, when you get to these agenda items, how much money do you want to add for additional legal expense? And it was reported by Bob Beaumont, the chair, those items had been pulled off the agenda, so we left after half an hour. Now it's back on the agenda for this coming Friday at 6 o'clock, a special meeting, and that meeting will come and go by the time many of our viewers see this show. It will probably already be reported in the Record Journal how much money the PUC is looking for to, add to their budget. Let me get Joe in on this conversation. Joe, back in February, you guys added hundreds of thousands of dollars to the PUC budget, I think on the expectation that that would be it. Your thoughts on just, what I reported?
Well, yeah, I don't know that we thought that would be it. I work in the insurance field, and so legal expense is something that just kind of grows and grows and becomes an animal unto itself. So I'm not sure. I'm not sure I was under the impression that that would be it, but I am under the impression that there needs to be a resolution at some point. This has been going on since 15, I believe, or 14.
Yeah, well, the mediation part, it was good faith negotiations, then it moved to mediation, and then it went into arbitration. So I actually think the good faith negotiation started in January 2014, I think. Yeah.
So, I guess my concern is just when do you stop chasing good money with bad? When it comes to legal expense. Is there a point at which you can pull out and? I guess the proof's in the pudding, right? If you get a big settlement at the end, then it was a worthwhile expense. If you don't, then it probably wasn't.
We got a short video clip of the part of the meeting in February where the additional funds for the PUC were granted by the council. Bruce, let's roll that first video, video 1. See what we see.
Process, which began in April of 2015. Is still ongoing and is moving into its final phases, which is to say the putting on of the case. And these funds are necessary to complete that process, or at least the portion that will fall within this fiscal year. Thank you. As noted in the memorandum that was provided regarding this item, the total amount budgeted for this purpose in this fiscal year is $360,000. That's to cover legal fees, the cost and expenses, the cost for the arbitrator, and the cost of our 2 expert witnesses, which are accounting firms that are advising on this. We expect that the total cost for this fiscal year will be $878,000.
There you go. Your thoughts?
Well, what struck me was that, that total cost figure in a fiscal year of $878,000, and I think Joe's right. Legal costs do go up, but what I can say is in the towns that we cover, to have one case cost $878,000 in a fiscal year, Mike, to me, that's unusual, and that's only part of the total cost of this case, which I think probably is approaching $2 million. And I don't know, I may have missed it, and you all have worked in government, but to spend $2 million on one case, to me, is just very rare.
And if Joe,
I'm sorry. I think you're absolutely right. It is rare, but but we have sort of a unique situation, right? Because we have our own electric division, which is something most towns don't have. So there's sort of a special circumstance here. There's all kinds of agreements and arrangements with the diesel power generators and the Pierce Power Station, and there's all these antenna to this item. So
several shows ago, maybe it was back in March or something, I opined, it was in my humble opinion, that this case is one of the biggest scandals, or it came close to the word scandal, which I'd never used before, I don't think, on this show, even though we've covered a lot of controversial topics. I don't want to go into that in detail, but one of the areas was the fact that all of the contracts that our lawyer has negotiated have failed in one way or another because they're all in litigation. They can't be they can't be applied very easily, interpreted very easily, enforced very easily, all of those contracts. And that, if you go to a client and say, hey, I'm going to charge you $300 for a contract. Oh, and by the way, it'll be in litigation. And oh, by the way, under this contract, you will be overcharged. But here's my legal services, pay my bill, and I'll see you in a couple years and pay me a lot more to litigate it. Okay? Well, that happened. Obviously, this is a fictitious recreation of a conversation that never occurred, but I think you get the point. This happened contract after contract after contract. That's one component of the scandal. The other is that clients control litigation, and legal fees should never, when you have a sophisticated client, get out of control. They should never get out of control. There should be a litigation budget, and you hire attorneys experienced in complex litigation to give you a litigation budget, and you map out the expenses at the beginning of the case. Yeah, things can happen that are unforeseen, but the reason why you hire experienced counsel so that very little is unforeseen. And here we have a budget, a litigation expense that has grown and grown and grown and grown. It seems like at every step of the way, the PUC is coming back and saying, we misestimated. We misestimated, and maybe they're blaming it on the arbitrator. They blame it on the the other lawyer. They have all kinds of fingers to point. But this is part of the scenario which I described as almost a scandal, or as close to one as I've seen. Joe, you can mop up the topic.
Well, like I said before, I think the proof is in the pudding. And I agree that legal expenses, they can certainly get out of hand. But I think, in an arbitration, there's a lot of things that can happen that could then, cause you to spend more money. When I said the comment about chasing good money with bad, is there a point at which you cut out and try to run and give up, or do you keep fighting it with the hopes of getting something in the end? And I think that's,
Wallingford's not cutting and running now. Okay, we'll come back to that. Ralph.
I think what residents should understand is that the Charter Revision Commission recently had an opportunity to increase oversight in this area, and at a time when we're questioning the oversight of an important legal matter, and I think they're fair questions, the Charter Revision Commission opted not to increase, and as a taxpayer and a resident, that concerns me.
Joe, what do you think about adding more people to the PUC?
It's a good question, because the council had recommended that as something that they should take a look at, and they did. And the mayor and George Adair went and spoke against it. If you had 5 people, say 5 commissioners, would the administration have the same influence over them? They probably would, right? Because the mayor's going to choose the individuals. But I would like to see more people on the PUC.
Well, isn't it coming back to you?
It is, and I know there's a process by which we can add things to the.
Yeah, you can
potentially add
recommend.
things to or send it back to them to take a look at.
What's your position going to be on that point?
I think that we should add more people to the PUC.
All right, so you're going to be saying that.
Yep.
That's
All
good
right.
to hear.
That's good to hear.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the budget. Change the subject a little bit. We will be revisiting the CMEC arbitration because it's more will develop. Budget. The town budget is sort of a complicated and sort of a nuts and boltsy sort of a thing, and it can be boring, but it can be sort of loaded with palace intrigue, to some degree. I don't want to overstate that,
Right.
but it can be. The mayor comes up with his budget around April 1. There's a month of meetings or workshops that the council has. It gives the councilors a chance to ask questions and ferret out information from the town departments, sometimes with an eye of just learning how government works, sometimes with an eye of changing the mayor's suggested numbers, and I think both are legitimate, because you got a great opportunity during budget workshops to ask things that add to your body of knowledge, and after year after year after year, if you're a curious counselor, you can become quite knowledgeable in these things. So, Joe, you've sat through a few of them now, and this time I sensed a little bit of shift in your view of the budget process. So I want to start you with a sort of a general question. What general plan would you have preferred for the budget process and a budget outcome, including a mill rate?
So this is essentially 2 years in a row that we've come to the end and we've gotten it as exactly the mayor's budget. And the council really hasn't had much input in terms of changes or deletions or anything, reductions in the budget. So I think my concern right now is just the transparency of the whole process. I don't want to be operational. I don't want to tell the department heads how to run their departments, but I think we need a little more transparency with regard to where the money's spent and so on. I think if you look at the number of transfers that we have at any given meeting, obviously in government you're going to do transfers, right?
A transfer from one line item to another?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, and you're always going to have transfers, right? We had them on the Board of Ed, but we just have an abundance of transfers on the town side. And so you're dealing with a smaller budget than the board, and I have concerns about that. The mayor feels that every account is important. He's right, except that we're transferring so much money that I'm concerned that every account isn't important, that there's potentially money stashed in different places.
The mill rate that the mayor proposed, were you okay with the mayor's mill rate?
Well, it's funny. That's kind of a loaded question, right? Were you okay with it? Well, I was okay with it from the perspective that if the budget's fair, then you need to raise taxes. And so you're only raising taxes a very small amount, right, which is better for residents. But at the same time, do I feel that we did everything we possibly could to make sure that we didn't need to raise taxes at all? Not really.
So what would you have changed? What will you do different next year?
So I think what we need to do is we need to work on just some better numbers for the council. I don't feel like the council gets a ton of information with regard to the budget. So you get the budget book, prior to budget season, and then you get a monthly financial statement from the town. But the financial statement is really just a pile of data and how the money's in every account. And then we do a bunch of transfers. So at the end, you don't really know, what's in that financial statement really has no relevance to what the final budget's going to be at the end. So, I know that the administration's position has been that the audit really is the only place that we can get the accurate data from. But I think we just need to try a little harder to understand where the money goes, and make reductions potentially.
Ralph, your thoughts on?
Well, I think that's a good approach. I think that even if you find things that you want to adjust and you're on the council, you then have to find the votes to do it. And it just seemed like while there may have been problems with, maybe the problem with some of the things that Jason Zandri and I think Craig Fishbein was a part of, some of the problem may have been in the substance of what they were trying to do, but they were making some effort to adjust things like tax collection rate, contribution to the pension fund, and it did seem to run into a majority of resistance.
Well, they passed. All the items passed
Okay.
that they had looked to make reductions to, and then in the end we couldn't balance the budget because we couldn't get enough votes to reduce the taxes, so we had an unbalanced budget, and so that's sort of where it ended up. So I voted for
Good point.
those items to reduce, and then at the end, we were sort of we were stuck. So, let's be honest, I felt that the mayor's budget was pretty decent, all factors considered, based on what we've seen in the past. Minor raising of taxes, it was $2.8 million more than last year. 1.8 of that was Board of Ed. And the other $1 million was really just the ambulance fund, because that had been an enterprise project, and then that was put into the regular budget. So they're really, on the town side, they did reduce the overall budget by a little bit.
There's some areas of controversy that came up in the course of this process and reported on. So let me get your thoughts on some of these areas. The use of reserves or the fund balance. The mayor in his budget says he was going to spend, I don't know, you may interpret this differently, but somehow use whatever that word means. Use whatever that, does it mean spend, or does it mean just designate and leave in the bank? 7.2 million. A big jump from the past. And of course, if the 7.2 million was actually spent out the door, the fund balance would drop, reserves would drop, same thing,
Right.
fund balance reserves would drop. Credit agencies' red lights would go off with a blinking, hey, let's go visit Wallingford. There'd be an operating deficit. Did you take the 7.2 million seriously as money that was going to be spent?
No. Because
why not?
Last year we had $4 million, which is what we were taking from the surplus, and then it all went back at the end plus
Right.
more. So I don't think the 7.2 million is serious. Now, granted, the state could cut us. The 10 million. The 10 million is kind of off the table, but I mean, there's other cuts that could happen from the state. So the whole situation, is sort of in flux right now. But no, I don't take it seriously. I think that all that money is going to end up back in the fund balance at the end of the year.
So that goes to the credibility of the budget. I mean, it sounds like you don't take it that literally.
So. And it's an interesting point. I don't take it that literally, because I think at the end of the year we're going to end up with $7 million in surplus.
Yeah. Well, doesn't that mean that there's some light items that are overfunded?
Yes.
And that's why
That's why I want greater transparency, so we can take a better look at individual line items.
This issue of bonding keeps coming up, and I'm surprised there's as much confusion out there. I'm going to try to boil it
Right.
down so it works for everybody. Bonding is borrowing money. That's what it is. Bonding is a source of funds, just like you want to borrow money from a bank, and you want to borrow, I'm making this up, $15,000 for a car.
Okay.
You get a car loan.
Right.
And the $15,000 is not on your household budget. You don't have $15,000 of spare cash clicking around. Well, maybe you do, but
Right.
I tease them all the time.
Yeah.
So that's all right. So bonding is a source of funds that does not appear in the budget, and bonding has nothing to do with a capital non-recurring fund. Bonding has to do with a policy of the mayor and a policy of the town on what sort of things should be bonded. Maybe reasonable minds can differ over that point. The mayor and the comptroller have a very reasonable perspective that you only bond unless you really need the cash flow, and only then on real big ticket items, typically improvements to land, roads, bridges, paving, big stuff. The town frequently bonds for things that they don't intend to sell bonds on, because they say, if we ever run short of cash 2 years from now and something bad happened, we can always take this bonding ordinance and go to the bank and borrow money.
Okay.
That's all it is. End of the bonding story. Right. Joe, your thoughts. Where did bonding fit into the proposal of Jason Zandri and Craig Fishbein? What's your view on bonding, and what happened in this last budget session?
I would agree with you that I think the mayor's perspective on this is pretty reasonable, because it's always big ticket items and it's always things that are going to last at least 15 years. So it's almost always capital improvements. So I thought that the Jason Zandri thing didn't make a lot of sense from the perspective of now you're going to bond a lot of things that wouldn't fall into that category. And then you're sort of bonding for operational expenses, which I think is a big mistake, right? If you need to bond for operational expenses, then you need to cut the budget.
Putting on your credit card.
Exactly.
Food, clothing, and shelter on the household budget, but lights and there was a lot of controversy about the capital and non-recurring fund, which is basically electric division money, and maybe that money could be freed up to reduce the taxpayer's burden. Describe what each side was saying and where you came down on that.
Well, so there was a movement to release some of that money to help with the general fund or help with the general budget expenses. I kind of have an issue with that because I think that if you set that money aside for special expenses, that money may not be there forever, right?
This is $2 million, roughly
$2 million.
$2 million a year.
But it gets spent every year on something, right? Usually road improvements is one of the big ones, so they have so many roads, and so they set the money aside, and the roads may not get done right away, but they'll get done eventually, and that money's going to get spent on, on whatever major improvements. So I actually think the administration has a pretty reasonable approach to it at this point. I wouldn't want to see any electric money coming out of the electric budget, to pay for general expenses or anything else.
Yeah. The way the capital non-recurring fund works, there's an ordinance, a local law, that says the electric division must send over a certain amount of money. It's a formula based on its gross. Must send that over to the town. It lands in a special account. And an ordinance says, the ordinance that controls all this lists some things that are big-ticket improvements and says this is what the capital non-recurring money can be used for. It's not an exclusive list, but when you list 3 or 4 expensive things like schools and land improvements, if there's any additional use, they have to be sort of the same seriousness. So under that ordinance on the capital non-recurring fund, you couldn't buy toasters. I'm obviously exaggerating to, it's my rhetorical flourish, but that's the long and short of final thoughts on capital non-recurring before we get more specific.
I don't think we changed a lot in capital non-recurring. I think we have a pretty good plan, and the money every year is used for road improvements and some other things that are really necessary. So I think we just kind of leave it alone.
One of the discussions that took up, 45 minutes, I didn't time this, was the collection rate that is so important to a budget. What's a collection rate? The town levies tax bills. The tax bills eventually are secured by the real estate, I mean, you can't wiggle out of a property tax bill. So property tax collections are pretty secure, pretty regular, very predictable, and when you have a budget of $162 million and you send out property tax bills, there's a lot of property tax money coming in. Now, if you assume that you're going to get a 100% of your taxes, you're probably being optimistic because there are some that are late, go into foreclosure. It doesn't always work out just right. So if you budget for 100% of taxes coming in and available to spend, you're probably being too optimistic. And at the end of the year, you may not have all the property tax revenue you really need to balance the budget and pay for all the things you need to pay for. If you assume, on the other end of the spectrum, that the property tax collection rate is 50%, you're only going to get 50% of the taxes in. Again, this is just an example to illustrate the point. Obviously, you're being wildly pessimistic because then you'd have to double the taxes to get in just 50%. So the truth lies somewhere in between, nowhere near the midpoint. But the discussion of the appropriate property tax collection rate makes a big difference on how much property taxes is extracted from taxpayers. Bruce, I think we have slide 1, which is going to help me along with this discussion, which was a big issue, not only in dollars and cents for the taxpayers. Let's put up that JPEG slide 1 and see what we got. So the discussion centered around this. Jim Bowes and Mayor Dickinson said in their budget, by reverse engineering their figures, not getting quotes, not mining for quotes and things like that, but if you actually look at their numbers and do third-grade math, one will see that the mayor assumed a 97.677% collection rate, which raises $117 million in taxes. Fair enough. Good point. But is 97.677 the best number to use based on empirical data and history? And if you go back just over the past 3 years and you do some math, in which we're going to recreate for you, so buckle your seatbelt, Ralph. Pay attention, all right? You see, actually, we get in closer to 98.5, but I want to make it precise. It's 98.4867%. What's the difference? $1 million, basically.
Right.
$1 million. This is a big discussion. You know, this is a big variance. So, you know, you're just quibbling over 97% and change or 98% and change. No, this is $1 million issue.
Right.
And our search on the Citizen Mike Show is to find out the greater truth. Slide 2, Bruce, that JPEG number 2, and let's see what's going on. So we're going to see a video of Jim Bowes momentarily where he was sparring a little bit with Craig Fishbein, because Craig Fishbein was, as you will see, was saying that maybe our collection rate is a little higher than what was being assumed in the budget, and Jim Bowes was kind of caught in a corner, and he was doing a little bit of a wiggle, and in the course of like 20 or 30 seconds, which we're going to see, Jim Bowes came up, and watch for this when you see the video, 97.95, 98, 98.5, but the rate used by Jim Bowes, according to the math, was at 97.67, but the 3-year average that Jim Bowes set as the standard is 98.4867. Let's see that video, Bruce, that first, or that video number 2.
We're doing about 98%.
The last 2 or 3 years, we've averaged about, actually it's 97.95% or something. If you said 98%, you'd be very, very close.
Okay. And based upon the history, because I was starting to believe in the beginning that we were doing 100%, and in order to increase that line, would have to raise taxes.
I understand, yeah.
But the way to raise that line is actually to change our percentage. So instead of doing 97%, you do what history shows, which is closer to 98.5%.
Which is what's in the 17-18 budget, and
well,
it's the last 2 or 3 years. That's correct.
The 17-18 budget is projected at 97%?
98.
So that was part of the sparring. Joe, let me stop at this point and get your reaction to that whole discussion, and then we're going to fill in a few more details. But
Well, I think Craig's onto something there, because I feel like the administration tries to hedge their bets on both ends of the equation, right? Because we know we're under budgeting revenues, we know we're over budgeting expenses, right? And so I think that they're always kind of hedging their bets.
yeah, Ralph?
Well, just 2 comments. One, I think it's important for taxpayers to understand that this plausible way to, say, save $1 million
Save the taxpayers $1 million.
Save the taxpayers $1 million
right.
is a way to do that without actually having to cut $976,000 in teachers or staff or something else. And if it's done correctly, it's not smoke and mirrors. I've seen it in other towns where an elected official comes in with the authority, or an elected body with the authority comes in at the last minute, adjusts the tax collection rate, not based on trends, but just based on the fact that they want to give taxpayers a lower tax rate.
Like the state of Connecticut, he said snarkily.
Right, well, right. But I just want to be clear. What Craig and I think Joe and Mike are all suggesting to some is not smoke and mirrors. It's based on facts. Now, the mayor's supporters argue, as with everything with the mayor, well, you know, wouldn't you rather take a more conservative approach to this? Wouldn't you rather end up with more money at the end than less? Well, history shows you won't end up with less. Yeah. And then the second point, just real quickly about sparring, because it's an interesting dynamic that Joe and you had to deal with on the council that other towns don't have to deal with. I think Jim Bowes, you all know him better than I. As far as I know, he does a good job. But in other towns, when a councilor turns to somebody working for the chief executive, that person, like Jim Bowes, is working for them also. The dynamic that the mayor does not work for the council not only makes it difficult to get the mayor to change anything, but it also, it seems to me, makes it difficult to not have to spar with Jim Bowes over an established fact at an important council meeting. And that's just my commentary.
Joe, what do you think about that?
Well, again, I think that there's an intention to hedge their bets, and I think that there is a philosophy out there. We have a great mayor, and he does a great job running the town. But there is a philosophy out there that would say that you always try to, you underestimate your revenues, and therefore you'll always end up with money in the bank. So I think the mayor really doesn't want to run into a deficit. I think that's his biggest fear, and so I think that a lot of this is his way of assuring that under no circumstance would we have a deficit.
Well, on which side of the divide were you? On the Craig Fishbein side or on the Mayor Dickinson, Jim Bowes side?
Yeah, I'm definitely on the Craig Fishbein side because I think that it would only make sense that if you can make an accurate assessment of what you think you're going to collect, then use that as your budget number.
I got the impression of spot checking the videos of the meeting. I did not sit through 5.5 hours of that meeting and the 3 hours. No, I did not.
You didn't?
I did not. And the 3 hours.
Shame on you.
Council meeting, I did not. I spot checked the videos, but it seemed like this revenue line, the math that we put on the screen a few minutes ago, that the mayor's revenue line of 117 million was sacred. That you better not touch. Math, you didn't care about math, you didn't care about compromise, you didn't care about another, did you get that same impression?
So my impression is that every item in the budget is sacred.
Okay.
I mean, just to some extent. And I'm not saying that to be flip, but I'm just saying that, I feel like he's worked hard on it, and now he feels like he needs to defend it in front of us. And I don't think that it needs to be that way.
Bruce, I want to zip through quickly maybe slides 3, 4, 5, and 6. It may be give me a chance quickly to explain them, but we're going to blast through those real quick. So let's go to slide number 3, JPEG 3. So when I put up my math on the, I think it was the first screen, where did I get my 98.4 something or other? I did it the same way Jim Bowes in his verbal presentation to the council got it. He says he took an average of the last 3 years. So that's what I did. You just go into the audit. There's a page towards the back which gives the actual collection rate, the last known year being 2016. I just took those three numbers as the data, and I used them in my calculation. Bruce, next slide. So what I do, I just added them up. And divided by 3. I mean, there's no judgment on my part,
right.
And that's how you get 98.4867. That's the number that Jim Bowes set as the standard that should be used, but he didn't use it. Bruce, the next slide, which is, what, 5? Or whatever the next slide may be. Yeah, the next JPEG. Oh, that's the end of them? Okay, I guess we didn't collect them all. That's number 5. All right, is there a number 6? Let's go to 6. So there you go. We're back to the beginning. If you use a 98.4867, you get in 118 million and change. But if you use the other one, you get in 117 million or change, and we're back to the beginning of the debate. And that's how we got to this $1 million.
And I just want to ask you something, because on the
you gave me that look.
Because I just want to clarify this because it shows.
Yeah.
I think it shows that how does local government work? What is different about Wallingford?
Right.
Well, one thing that's different is you said Jim Bowes establishes a collection rate, or at least a trend in collection rate, but you said he didn't use it.
Well, he said in his verbal presentation, we didn't show a clip of it,
right,
that you just averaged the last 3 years.
But what I'm saying
to you,
so
that's what I did.
I think, and maybe I'm barking up the wrong tree, but it's really not. In other words, if Jim Bowes does these calculations,
right,
and says to the mayor, here's what I recommend as the tax collection rate, the mayor has the ability at that point to adjust Jim Bowes' recommendation.
Sure, but it went a step further this time.
Okay.
Because Jim Bowes says, this is what should be done,
right,
3-year average, and this is what I did. You re-engineer the math, it's not what he did. Okay. So he broke his own standard. And that's the point of the last 6 or 7 minutes.
Is it possible the mayor broke his standard?
No, I mean I think it's a little smoke and mirrors. I think it's a little spin. I think it's a little justification of a number they picked by spinning it in front of the council, who's a little ill-prepared to pierce the veil. Craig was onto something, and Jim Bowes did a dance, but no one forced Jim Bowes to walk through the math. That should have been done at a workshop, rather than the final meeting. That's when you have all the time in the world to get into this, these details. So Jim Bowes, you said 3-year average. you said, you know, this is how you do it, let's double check your math and see if it works. And then Jim Bowes will have to concede, because everyone's got a calculator on the cell phone, everyone will have to agree that he's $1 million off, and you say, okay, why did you do that? And then it's time for the mayor to come in and say, I did that because I want to build a surplus in. You don't want to be like Hartford, do you? That false choice again.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
You happy with that?
I'm very happy with it. I'm glad we discussed.
So another, Joe, do you have the last word on that before I go to the pension issue?
I can't disagree with anything you just said.
All right.
I think that the mayor has an idea in mind of what he wants for a surplus at the end, and so I think they take a percentage, and then he adds money to it.
So let's talk about the pension fund. There was a move, and I'm going to carefully use my words, I hope. There is a move, a motion, and a second, and a vote, not to reduce necessarily the contribution to the pension fund, because that would be, but to reduce the amount the budget said will be put in to the pension fund, and there's a big difference.
Okay.
So historically, what happens? The mayor puts in his budget. It's on page 27, actually, and I'm going to start using page 27. That includes the pension fund contribution, but it also includes other things. The pension fund is the dominant component of the expenses on page 27. It's the dominant component. And so on the last 5 years, I ran through the audits to find out how accurate the mayor's page 27 budget numbers were compared to actual results as reflected into the audit, to see if there's any extra money, any fat in that, without getting all emotional about, oh, you're cheating our retirees, you're not funding the pension. Just want to see what the results are. So going back from 2016 back to 2012, 501,000, too much in the budget. 488,000, too much in the budget. 391,000, too much in the budget. 381,000, too much in the budget. Then you go back to 2011, it goes down 172,000 and 171,000, too much in the budget. So the question is it fair game to look at those budget numbers and say, you know, maybe you got the wrong math, kind of, you know, like we've seen, maybe, and we're not saying don't underfund the pension, we're not saying, you know, violate the actuary. So I got to show a video clip, and then we're going to go to Joe. I don't know what that video clip number is, Bruce, but it's the next one. I think it's 3.
You know, Mike, but when you say, is that money that is allocated to go into the pension fund, but never goes in the pension fund?
Some of it, the numbers that I just...
Which I'm a little...
No.
Okay.
Page 27 has many things.
Okay.
The pension fund is the dominant one. The pension, because they're related expenses. But most of the numbers that I just ticked off were allocated, supposed to go into the pension fund according to the mayor. It's the actuary. We have to be responsible. This is the amount of the budget. Don't touch it, or you're being reckless. But it doesn't go. It all doesn't go in.
All right. And then it's important. I think people. So then, what happens to that money?
It goes in the surplus.
Okay.
We got that next video, Bruce? I don't know what it is. I think it's 3. I think it's.
I've received criticism after the pension report was generated that we should be funded better than 73% or 72 point whatever. So I'm not sure why we would deviate downward from the actuarial recommendation for funding the pension account. I think...
So the mayor stumbled a little bit. He had an answer about we don't want to be irresponsible and jeopardize, whatever. I didn't want to use our time with that. Joe, your thoughts on this issue?
Well, you know, so we're 72% or whatever how much of the pension is funded. So why not take that extra money and put it in the pension? That's what I don't understand, is why does it have to go back to the surplus? So that was an area that I thought was okay to cut, because if obviously you're not going to use it for the pension, then release it and have it, go back to the taxpayers.
Yeah, and that's the point. My quarrel with how Vinnie Cervoni presented that, it was like, there's something flawed about your morality if you want to cut pensioners' future retirement. It was like, I thought it was fairly craven, because I think Vinnie Cervoni knows the issue being raised, but either because he doesn't understand the issue or intentionally wants to blur the issue and confuse everyone, he's saying, well, I don't know why you'd want to, not do the responsible thing, but he never asked the mayor, why did you overfund the pension for the last 6 years? How is it that we ended up with 500 more on page 27? That's the question. That's the question. The town is putting, even if this $100,000 cut to that line item went through, the town would be putting in every penny that was supposed to go in under the funding formula, which is given by the actuary. Now, just one other thing that I researched 4 o'clock this afternoon before I raced in here. I got an old actuarial report, and I tried to square up the amount the actuary said with the mayor's budget for that year. They don't match. They don't square. So we're doing, how could you not do what the actuary said? The mayor's not doing what the actuary said, but yet it's this moral indignation on the part of Vinnie Cervoni in asking the question that cast a false light on this whole issue. Joe, your thoughts? I got to take a break and get a drink of water.
Yeah, I don't think that Vinnie doesn't understand. I think he knows the issue, and I think if the actuary tells you to put a certain amount towards the pension, then that makes sense. But any extra money should then also go towards the pension. That's what your pension line item is for.
Yeah.
So then, eventually, if you do it enough years, eventually you'll be 100% funded, and then.
So it was never ferreted out. Let's see the actuarial report. Let's see. Show me exactly where, it says that. Now, here's where this extra money comes in. When I was on the council, I asked the question, how come the town doesn't end up using all the money we're told we have to use? And I was told, and I think the answer still holds, the actuarial calculation is based on full staffing. We never have full staffing. So the mayor puts in the budget something representing full staffing, or if maybe there's a fudge factor, but he knows doggone well we never have full staffing.
So I don't know if you can budget, though, for less than full staffing. I mean, I think what you do is eliminate positions, right? If you're not going to fill them, then just eliminate them from the budget altogether.
Well, I think everyone can make their own judgment as to, what's the better way. I think what some members of the council were trying to raise, we end up year after year with taxpayer money that we don't need for the pension. Why is that? And if you're not denying it, which they can't because it's in the numbers, why are you taxing the taxpayers? Now, I don't mean that in an argumentative way. I expect a rational, clear, explanation, a good faith explanation, not the bad faith answers. I think it was bad faith. It's irresponsible. It's reckless. The credit rating agencies are going to pound us. This is a sacred number. You're messing with dynamite. See, that I think is demagoguing the issue. If the mayor has a good explanation as to why money is left over in the pension contribution line item, just give us the explanation, right, Joe? Am I off on this?
No, I don't think you're wrong. And I think, when we talked about transparency, I think that's the issue right there. If you don't need all that money, then don't put it in that line item. Or if you do, then use it for what you said you were going to spend it for in the beginning.
We got another video. I don't want to spend too much time on it because there's a couple I want to get to.
Good. But I want to just add
I'm sorry. Yeah,
I want to add to that
point. You had the gleam in your eye.
Well, because I think that, there's a lot of detail here, and I think you're ferreting it out well, but I think to someone who hasn't been a counselor it can seem
arcane,
complex and overwhelming.
Yeah.
But I think one thing I've pointed out that is a basic principle that isn't being applied, I don't think.
Right.
Which is when I budget, and I think when most people in the private sector budget, what you do when you're about to budget for the next year is somewhere in October, you look at your expenses to date and you are able to get what you will spend for the entire year, what we call actual, which I'm sure does the town have actual?
The town, yeah, we do.
Okay.
Have actuals.
Okay. And then you take what you put in that line item for the next year is more based on the actual than what you budgeted. And I think some of these things could be resolved if instead of looking at, we had a department head, I think, on tape who said, or somewhere along the line, how did you come up with your budget? Well, it's 2% to what I planned, that I budgeted for this year.
That's not actual, as
That's
we
not
agree.
actual.
That's not
And
actual.
it's no way to budget, and it's even a concept that even I can understand in the midst of all this. That if you are constantly just adding 2% to what you budgeted the year prior and never looking at your actual experience, you will always usually end up budgeting more. Now, there's a reason to look at actual too. That one reason to look at actual is if your actual is more than you budgeted. So you need to know that. But I just think that a lot of these things would be worked out if you looked at what you were actually spending and then budgeted for the next year based on that.
So, you know, it's an interesting point, Ralph. And when I was in the Board of Education, we used to have, you would get monthly in the Operations Committee, you would get a list of items, major ticket items for like salaries, fuel, you know, things of that nature, benefits, and you would get year to date from the beginning of the school year till now, how it went every month. And so you would have an idea if you were trending, you know, you were trending high or trending low on every item. I think the town needs to go to some sort of format like that where we can have an idea, you know, where we are. Because I don't buy this whole, you know, the audit's the only way that we would know what we spent. Because the departments must know what they're spending on.
Absolutely, that's why they get paid. The mayor has a policy. He doesn't like to be too forthright about that. And during the budget workshop process, or as you get into May, I think the councilors have a right to know, Mayor, for this fiscal year ending June 30, 2017, if we're running a surplus, breaking even, or running a deficit. The answer will be, as a matter of ideology, oh, we don't know. They know.
Right.
They know.
And I just want to make a point here, though, that because me and the mayor do have one thing in common, which is that
good looks.
Among good looks, listen, I would love, and I think most people in the private sector would love if our bosses or our whatever financial authority we report to would just allow us to add 2%. That would be wonderful.
Yeah.
But the reality is those budgeting authorities, whether it's a ownership, board of directors, what they want to see is your actuals. And that allows you to build less of a cushion in your budget.
Sure. Should we move on?
Yes, we'll move on.
One of the issues that you and I had talked about, I think with Tom Laffin, was whether or not the town should add 2 police officers.
Yes.
And there was a case made for adding 2 police officers to the budget. I think it was $200,000 and change. But there was another case to be made. Tom Laffin was here in the show and made the case for 2 additional police officers. But let's hear the other side of it, and we'll see who the star of that show was.
Right.
So I think this is 6, Bruce, video 6. We're going to skip one. I'm sorry, video 5. Whoops. Yeah, there we go. We got it. We got it.
The police chief didn't ask for them. He may have acknowledged, when questioned, that he could put them to good use. No one would ever argue that the town was not better off with more police protection, because that would be an absurd statement to make. That's a far cry from the town is not safe enough without additional policemen, and that's an important distinction to make.
I feel like when we talk about public safety, we bring a lot of emotion into it, you know, stopping home invasions and things. The facts for me are simply that the chief said when he testified before us that we were okay with the staff that we have, that we're doing fine, and that at some point in the future we'll need more officers, but not now. And I appreciate that some of that may have been financial, but I do believe the chief when he says that, and I don't think that he's playing us or he's trying to play a role for the mayor. So if the chief says he doesn't need the officers now, then I don't think we need the officers now.
There you go. Between Joe Marone and Vinny Testa, I think we encapsulated. Joe, what happened to this issue? What was the vote?
So ultimately, it got voted down. It got rejected, the idea of adding 2 police officers. I just didn't think, I think that you probably could have found the money for 2 police officers in the budget already. But again, the chief didn't, if he felt like he needed officers, he could have come to us and said, I need 2 officers. And I'm sure we would have funded the 2 officers.
Yeah. So I think the moral of one of the takeaways from that, if our chief of police really believes that this is a serious public safety issue, he's got to have that sense of urgency and no nonsense about it. But we played the video of his comments at the budget workshop. I mean, it was, as Vinny Testa and Joe Marone said, you know, we could always use more help. Absolutely. But, you know, we don't have an emergency. We don't have a problem. So
what department head wouldn't want more labor?
That's
right.
Yeah.
If you could get it.
So towards the very end of the night, and Bruce, this is going to be the last video. Towards the very end of the night, there was a little disagreement between Vinny Testa and Craig Fishbein. And it seemed, Joe, and this is a question for you, it seems as though on May 4, the workshop night, Craig Fishbein was frustrating a lot of counselors, and this was maybe like the last straw, and Vinny Testa erupted at the means and methods of Craig Fishbein for the prior 5 hours. We'll get Joe's answer to that question, but let's play that last video.
Councilor Fishbein, it was nice of you to do, but is it not likely that when we vote on this budget, because there's going to be a tax increase included in it, you're going to say no? So why, you know what I mean? You're going to vote against this budget. Why are you adding money to it?
It's $900, and yes, I will be voting against this budget.
Right. So, but you know we're going to all approve it. So this guy's going to get his extra training money, but we're all going to get slammed for voting for a tax increase, and you're going to bail out and say I didn't vote for a tax increase.
No, see,
But you're going to get but you're going to get credit for getting this guy his $900. This is the kind of stuff that really gets under my skin, especially at 11:45.
Observation before that video started. Craig Fishbein had wanted to put $900 into the budget for some training money for members of the building department, and I forgot to say that. So he made a motion to add $900. Vinny Testa says, yeah, you want to add $900 and be a hero to the building department, but you're going to vote against that $900 because built in is a tax increase. And that was the explanation for that. That's how that unfolded. Joe, the atmosphere in the room at about that point in time, 12 midnight or whatever.
Well, yeah, it was 11:45 at that point. I think we were all getting a little punchy.
Yeah.
But this is the second year in a row that Craig has attempted to put money into the budget that he was going to vote against anyway. So I don't.
So what? I mean, is that annoying? Is that irritating? Is that justifiable? Or?
It is irritating to me because I think if you're going to add to the budget, then you need to have some. You know, if you're going to vote for the budget, then that's fine. If you're not going to vote for the budget, then just sit back and you know, you haven't taken a lot of steps to reduce the budget or bring it to an area where you would vote for it. So I don't think that you can then add money to the budget. And we're talking $900. In addition, the $900 for training to me is like an operational expense. Right? So why am I going to tell a department head that you need $900 more of training? Again, it's like the labor, right? What department head wouldn't want more money for training? You know, if I came up to you and said, do you want $900? Who's going to say no?
So was it added to the budget?
No.
No. Okay.
No.
I was surprised that, I mean, and I know a lot of big picture things were talked about, and Craig did, but I was just surprised that a counselor would even take an interest in a $900 expense. And while we've talked a lot about here about what the mayor should and shouldn't do and maybe disagree with him, I think I have confidence in the mayor's ability to determine the training, $900 in training money for a department. I also think that within any budget that you could probably carve out $900, whether it's there or not. So.
Last year was $500,000 for education, to add to education, which is a significant increase.
That's different. That's, yeah.
So, Joe, is the atmosphere, that's not quite the word I'm looking for, but is the credibility of the mayor's budget diminishing over time with the surpluses piling up, and everyone seems to know historically these numbers are not to be taken too literally. You said so yourself. Are things changing and evolving?
So, I mean, for me, things are evolving. But, credibility is a funny word, right? Because at the end of this, we might go through all this. They might give us all the things we ask for, and then we might say, yeah, you're doing this 100% correct. But at this point, I can't say that because I haven't seen all the inputs. And so I just feel like with more data, perhaps I can make a better decision.
And I just want to press you one last time before we sort of close things off. I'm not seeing any real changes for the workshop next year. I mean, now's the time that those in your shoes, and there were many times 5 of 9 that agreed, with your perspective. It's
right.
an interesting coalition of Vin Testa and Jason Zandri and Joe Marone, Craig Fishbein, and sometimes those numbers shifted. I think I had named 5. I'm not sure. But it seems that a coalition is sort of there now that don't take as literally and as seriously as all the mayor's numbers.
Well, coalition is a funny word, too, because I think it's item by item. I think I try to judge every item on the merits. And so I think that there are things in the budget that I don't take I take less seriously now than I did last year.
Yeah.
Last year I spent tons of time pouring through the budget. This year, had I not shown up to one budget meeting, we got the mayor's budget at the end anyway, so it wouldn't have made a difference.
Ralph, any final thoughts on?
Well, no, just that
Old,
I think that, at the Record Journal, I have definitely noticed over the last 6 months more people paying attention to how the mayor budgets, more people questioning it, and I base that on letters we've received, columns we've run, and comments like Craig Fishbein made and others during budget sessions where they were, questioning basic principles of the mayor's budget. The quote from Craig was, and he was a little frustrated, and he said, "We have increased taxes at the same time we have increased our reserves." And there's more people saying things like that publicly.
Agreed?
I agree absolutely. I mean, we're in the worst economic time of the last 20 years, and we're still increasing our surplus, which I think is kind of telling.
I think the way, or one way to approach this, the use of reserves and the use of surpluses during the workshop, try to ferret out from Mayor and Jim Bowes the answer to this question: what are you trying to accomplish with respect to a surplus, deficit, or break even? Where are you trying to end up? Now they're going to wiggle and they're going to dance and they're not going to want to answer that question, but it makes a huge difference. And it seems to me the correct answer is either we want to break even. We don't want a surplus, but we'll risk a small surplus if we need to with some tight budgeting. We certainly don't want to pile on another $1 million of surplus. We want a budget that kind of breaks even. We have enough in the reserves. We have enough in the fund balance. We don't need to add to it. And start with that. And then, as you go through the budget department by department, ask these questions. Why did you overfund last year and the year before the pension or the health insurance? Why was Henry McCulley overfunded? How do we know we're not making the same mistake this year? Why did we under budget revenue? What went wrong? Where was the math wrong? And start comparing the history with some very specific stuff through the workshop process, and I think you might get closer to it. Final thoughts? Joe's final thoughts, and then we're going to sign off. Joe?
Let Joe have his fun.
Yeah, so in the next coming months, I'm going to present some items before the council to talk about some of the financial things and what we can do to maybe get a handle on something. Now's the time to do it, right? Get ready for next year.
Yeah.
So,
got a quick hint, a scoop for us as to what your thoughts might be? General areas, not...
Yeah, general areas. I'd just like to see more reporting from the department heads all along. Or if we could get the financial data that we get now, if we could get a report of that data with just summaries by object code would be very helpful.
Let's make that the final word. Joe did a great job. He's
Yes,
a great guest
we
again.
appreciate
Thanks
him
for
coming
coming
on.
on the show,
thanks for
the
having me.
sixth or
Appreciate it.
seventh time or whatever, or maybe more at this point. And thank you all for watching the Citizen Mike Show. We do appreciate it. We put these shows on. We produce them Wednesday afternoon. You got to see them Thursday at 9 o'clock. That's when it's freshest. If not then, Friday at 9, or the following week, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday at 9. Or you can go to the WPAA.TV website, scroll all the way down to local producers on YouTube channels. Click that, and the WPAA shows appear. Click on the Citizen Mike Show and all the other shows, and you're all set to watch via YouTube. Thanks for tuning in. Good night, everybody.